Recording in progress.
Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. It feels like 2020 all over again, and the sequel still sucks. Thank you guys for everything you're doing. We are under a barrage with Omicron and really speaking to the work about this. One thing I've been reading a lot, and Jamal, if you can post this link in, is Catherine Wu. Catherine Wu is a PhD in immunology and virology from Harvard and writes for The Atlantic and also the New York Times. And her pieces throughout this entire pandemic have been ahead of the curve, even more so than I think the CDC. And I think what we are seeing from this coalition to Catherine to the CDC is Omicron is going to be here for a while. We're entering the peak, and this is the United States. It will probably peak through mid-February. And if Catherine's correct, and she's been correct a lot, it's going to be a long tail. I think a lot of people have positive hopes like, oh, it's mild. Look at South Africa. They just went up and then right back down. Well, big differences. Catherine explains those. South Africa is heading into summer. It's a much younger population. She is, and believing, and I, again, have been reading her for quite a while, it's going to be a long tail. So I know I've had a few phone calls with you guys, and I know you're armed for battle. And we'll be talking about unlocking the additional funding this week for the second half of the funds from our current funders, as well as additional funding. So we'll talk really quickly about midterm reporting because that is due end of month to our funders. That unlocks the second half of funding. Adding testing. I've had a few phone calls with folks, and now testing has become a really big thing. The new government website, for those of you that haven't heard, it's up. It works amazingly. It was actually up a day early, and anyone in the United States can get 4 free kits delivered. I've already ordered mine. And then we're going to have an open forum on advocacy and information. So first of all, we're heading into right around the midterm reporting, even though we're only about 4.5 months in, and we feel really, really good. We projected that we would reach 250,000 immigrants. We've actually reached close to 600,000. We've really knocked reach out of the park, and vaccinations are just a little bit below target. So it was the projection based off a lot of organizations on how many people we could inform in many different channels, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes via text, sometimes over social media. And all of those reaches have been much higher than expected. And so thank you to everyone for everything that you do, whether it's in person, digital, for the informations in various languages. And for the vaccinations, that is the area that we're going to continue focusing on. Please realize, if you haven't, this isn't just vaccinations on site where jabs are made into arms, as certain organizations do, but they're also ones where people inform you. So as we head into the second half of the grant, we will look at some organizations have reported really high reaches, but 0 vaccinations. So there's a question to be asked of, are we actually capturing all the vaccinations we've made because we're informing so many and many people are getting vaccinated? To that effect, Jamal, starting tomorrow, will just send everyone individually an email about where we expected the reach and the expected vaccinations. And some will be 0. Obviously, Freedom for Immigrants, I know, has done an excellent job informing inmates, but I think, Sierra, is it pretty much virtually impossible to validate that anyone got vaccinated, correct, given the current state of detained inmates?
Yeah, they can share over the hotline if they have gotten their vaccine or booster, but it is pretty low. Yeah.
Okay. The figures we got when we first proposed, so realize they are 7 months old. They're meant to start conversations. So if you have a question about it, just let us know and we'll hop on a quick call. Overall point being, we feel very good and very, that the second half of the funding will be unlocked. Additionally, we have started courting for an additional round of funding, and we are going to include testing. A lot of organizations that I talked to in the past few weeks said testing has become a really big thing. And as we've known over the holidays, that's problematic because people will just waited so long for testing. This will appear on the weekly report starting this week. It is optional. If you're doing testing, please start tracking it. The more impact we can show, the more funding we can raise. And it's not just knowing who's been positive and how many people we've tested. Testing actually has a wider impact, and I'm going to give a few moments to GRM. They are the first organization that is tracking testing and has been testing for a while in Reynosa and other border areas. And Danielle, if you'd like to just talk about why a test is so important.
Yeah.
Or Sam.
Hello, I'm Sam. This is Danny from Global Response Management. So we have been in the northern border, working on the Mexican side with migrant communities in camps and shelters since third or fourth quarter 2019, so predating the pandemic. And testing since the pandemic started, obviously, has been a big part of our strategy towards managing that. And it also goes a long way of everyone involved, specifically.
We're getting a little bit of a delay.
We do a lot of testing.
Could you turn off your video? Could you just turn off your video? Because we can hear it, but it's just a little.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now that's coming through better. Go
Sure.
ahead.
Is this any better?
Cool.
All right. Yeah, so we do a lot of testing for shelter placement, a lot of testing for people crossing the border, and in addition to testing for medical indications. Looking forward, as the migrant protection protocols MPP are reinstated in the Rio Grande Valley area, we expect to see a lot of changes in the process, but we don't think that the importance of testing in that process is going to go anywhere. We also know that there will be a very large camp shelter setup opening in Reynosa in the next month or so, which is going to require everyone going there to be tested. We're estimating around 2,500 tests, 2,500 people for that. And each of those tests is someone who's able to live in a safe environment with access to essential services, as opposed to living where they live now in a plaza without electricity, clean drinking water, boat services, and horrible security situation. So generally speaking, that's what the situation with testing looks like for us. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and just so you know, to give you guys some numbers, in 2021, we administered over 7,000 of those COVID tests, and roughly 75% of those are contributing to shelter placement, and about 25% are contributing to successful crossing. Sorry if I'm repeating you a little bit, but so GRM's the only free option available to migrants and asylum seekers in Matamoros, which is where one of our clinics is located, and one of two in Reynosa. And the test cost us approximately $12 for one individual test. So we purchased those in bulk, and funding for that will be incredibly helpful as we continue to get those tests out.
And that $12 figure is just the actual test. It doesn't include the cost of your staff to be able to administer.
So it does not include like manpower, but it includes the test and then other essential equipment for the administration of the test.
Got it.
So like stuff like gloves and like pipettes would be included, but like the payroll and like facilities costs are not.
All right, thank you guys for everything that you do. I mean, overall at the high level, we know from GRM's work, testing means you can get shelter. Testing means you can get a crossing, potentially be reunited with family. For those of you that are receiving the second half of your funding, no one asked to actually do testing. That back in June when we created all the budgets, testing just wasn't on our minds. Can you use your second half of funding for testing? Yes. I'm going to write the funders and let them know testing was not an area of concern then, but it is now. And there's no restriction on using it for testing. GRM received their funding to do these testing. All that we ask is if you are using some of the additional budget and potentially future new budget, because we are entering into a third round of fundraising for all organizations, testing is allowed. Please just use the weekly testing report, weekly testing form to actually capture how many people were tested and positive. And thanks to GRM, they actually helped us define those questions because those are the most important. Any questions on that before we start the open forum? So quick highlights again from the call. Please make sure all your reporting up to date is accurate. I am waiting until next week to put down the final numbers to our funders so we can show as much impact as possible. Again, feeling really, really good with our reach and vaccination. Jamal tomorrow will just send individual emails about every organization's progress to date. Any questions on that, we'll hop on a line. Please bear with us, by the way. We are operating, I think, close to 50% right now, given our own staff being, or families being infected. So we're doing our best. You'll see a lot of out of offices, but we're trying as hard as we can to stay on top of things. And I know everyone here is equally suffering and stressing out over the same. Any questions before we go to the open forum?
I just had a quick question. Specific to testing, are we counting like the rapid COVID testing, or is it specifically to only the PCR?
Good question. It's open. We're just tracking open. Actually, out of curiosity, just Danielle and Sam, for what you guys are you doing both or just antigen rapid tests?
So we do antigen testing primarily, yeah.
And out of curiosity for other folks on the call that do PCR testing, what's your average turnaround time? I just got one from my daughter this morning and they quoted me 10 days to actually get a result. Is that what other people are seeing for delays on PCR tests? Indira gave a thumbs up. So 10 days sounds normal. Right. So it's meant to be either test. We're not tracking the difference of antigen versus PCR. It is just the numbers of tested. And these are optional, right? So if you are not able or not your area, again, going back with the Freedom for Immigrants, I don't think FFI has any capability of tracking that. It is an optional field just for those organizations that are doing testing.
Bart,
Mm-hmm.
that's the difference between doing PCR and doing the antigen? Which one is the self-test?
Antigen is the self-test that's rapid, where you can get results as 15 minutes or less. PCR is, Sam, actually, do you guys want to speak to this since you have more probably medical expertise than anybody else on the call?
Sure, yeah. So an antigen, most rapid tests that are available these days are antigen tests, although not every antigen test is a rapid home test for personal use. The PCR test, the short version is that a PCR test is the gold standard. It's the most accurate, but it also takes a longer amount of time and needs to be conducted in an actual laboratory. So typically when you hear about there being long wait times, if you do a PCR test for in a vacuum, it may only take like a day or 18 hours or whatever for the test to develop. But the problem is that right now, as everyone knows, there's a massive surge of Omicron and everyone's getting tested. So the delays are just in processing all those tests. And then as we were mentioning in the chat, unfortunately, just due to the infectious cycle of COVID-19, a test that you don't get a result on for 10 days is the utility of that is very limited in both a medical sense and also for the sense of trying to figure out quarantine and isolation.
Exactly. As my own personal kind of experience with it today, the PCR test that we did for my 2-year-old, super fast. We were in and out of the center that took it, and then it's 10 days to wait, most likely due to a supply chain logistics of getting it to the lab and getting the results back, which will be texted to us if the result comes back over text. But now that I've given 2 antigen tests at home over the past 10 days and had a third party do an antigen rapid test, all 3 came back negative. I'm going to make an assumption that she is actually indeed negative, because 10 days makes it impossible, to, by the time we get the results, it's 10 days old, right? So
Exactly. You're already outside the window that you would be quarantining for anyway. So it you know, in medicine, there's a general idea that you shouldn't do a test or a procedure if it's not going to change the way that you treat that illness. And if you're only getting it afterwards, it's the answer is academic at that point.
Yeah. Follow-up question, Bart, and Danielle. The PCR test is the one that you administer yourself, right? Like, because we do get tested now in Catholic Charities. We get tested twice a month. So what they do is there is somebody there who is kind of looking, managing the test kits. They give us a vial. We complete a form with our information. They give us a vial, and then we do administer it ourselves, and then put it back. And the agency sends it through FedEx, and then we get the results from the lab that analyzes. But it takes about 2 to 3 days to get the results, because we are not allowed to enter the building unless we get a negative test.
So I can't say for sure whether that's a PCR or an antigen test from your description. It sounds like a PCR test due to the fact that you have to send it away, but it is also possible to do an antigen test in a lab with just like slightly increased sensitivity and specificity. And it is also the case that most home self kits are antigen tests. But the fact that you have to send it away implies to me that it's likely a PCR test, but I can't tell you for certain.
Thank you.
One quick follow-up question, and then we'll get to Karen's open forum. There is some anecdotal evidence that Omicron is not as perceptive, doesn't come positive on antigen tests as much as previous variants. Is that accurate, Sam, or anything that you may know better about that in terms of do rapid antigen tests, are they good at detecting Omicron?
So I don't have any like data or studies that I can cite on this. We know anecdotally from hospital systems that people we've worked with have talked about that it seems like the sensitivity with Omicron is lower on both PCR and antigen tests than it was with the previous variants. I don't know that I'm sure this is being studied. I don't know if there's published research on that yet. But anecdotally, it seems that like across the board, there's less sensitivity, and that's to an extent to be expected. As the virus mutates more, it's going to be, the Venn diagram of what you're looking for and what it is just like a little bit more and more off.
Mm-hmm. It's good visual analogy. Thank you. And I agreed. I don't even think I think media outlets, including the CDC, have not yet reported any conclusive findings on Omicron's variant detection. It's too early. The wave has just hit here. My bet is that Israel will have that information first, who are now onto their 4th booster. We'll see how effective that is. So how do we get this information that we obviously, as kind of leads in a certain sense of figuring this stuff out and again, disseminating it into our immigrant communities? Karen sent out an email to a few people. Karen, I'm going to give you the floor of what question you sent out and what have you been doing to reach the Latinx and indigenous communities in Humboldt. So if you could give a little bit about your organization, what you've tried, and then we'll do our best to see if we can help.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karen. I work for Centro del Pueblo. Some of the things that have been happening, I think everybody has been experiencing after the holidays. We have had a big surge in people and in families who have gotten COVID. Humboldt right now is currently a little bit behind on all this information. We're behind on all the testing and the dissemination of information. And so Centro del Pueblo has been currently trying to kind of catch up with all this stuff. And unfortunately, quite recently, about a week ago, I had COVID too. And so I was inside the house, quarantining. I personally didn't receive too many symptoms. It felt like the flu for me. But a lot of other folks have been, who have not been vaccinated and who have been having difficulties and experiencing bigger symptoms and a harder journey through what COVID has gotten. And so previously, before this like upcoming year and starting again, Centro del Pueblo has partnered with the Department of Human and Health Services to provide resources translated in Spanish. And so this has taken the show in, this has been in videos, this has been in posts, this has been in different types of appearing at different clinics. Unfortunately, right now, the Department of Human and Health Services is also backed up. And so we're experiencing this disconnect between our organization, as well as the leader of that organization has currently quit. And so we're kind of experiencing this like difficulty in having this information be disseminated and obtaining the most accurate and informed, the most accurate information that we could then translate and give it out to our community. We've also created infographics on social media and started tracking people's reach. And we have had, we've sent text. We've found that this is not as convenient for a lot of folks. And the reason is because a lot of folks in our community tend to have difficulties with technology. And so there's a lot of technology illiteracy. We live in a really rural area. Humboldt County is big, but we're covered by redwoods and our internet tends to be unstable. And so this is something that has come up in the way that we do community organizing. We've realized that this is one of our barriers. We've also done paper brochures, but being able to disseminate this has been difficult without also exposing our employees and volunteers. And we've partnered with local organizations to do responses to COVID-19 cases. Right now, I think that a lot of organizations kind of thought it was going to kind of be done, and so a lot more grants need to be written in order to be to assist with these helps and or assist with these resources. And so some of the barriers that we've encountered is a lack of accurate information in Spanish. Even though I think Facebook and a lot of other platforms have done their best to fact check a lot of posts and infographics, still in Spanish, this is something that has not occurred. And so there is still a lot of misinformation. And so we've encountered, as we're writing these infographics and putting them out in our social media, we realize that we get a lot of comments about folks laughing or saying, this is untrue, this is this is not gonna happen. So often what we do is we have to track those comments as well and then hide them. Or try to find some way to kind of make sure that this is not something that folks think that we're not giving the right information. We make sure to cite the CDC, we make sure to cite DHHS when these things come out, but unfortunately, this is still something that a lot of folks are dealing with and thinking that the pandemic is still, or that COVID-19 is still something more of a hoax or a conspiracy rather than a reality. We're also struggling to maintain our staff safe. As I mentioned, I previously had gotten COVID, and so we have a really small team and one of like 6 right now. And so we had 2 of us get COVID. Now that leaves like a really small team, smaller team that we have, while also getting folks coming in and asking for a lot of resources. We have been able to evaluate our efforts. We have not been able to evaluate our efforts, which I think goes back to what Bart was talking about, of being able to get a lot of people reaching a lot of folks, but also not being able to pinpoint when they need all these, if they have actually gotten the vaccination. And so I think what we're kind of looking for, and one of the questions that we're asking all of you is, how do you track these vaccinations? And I mean, retrospectively, I think sometimes through text, we found out that a lot of folks don't know how to use a survey. And so we'll send them a link and it doesn't work. A lot of what we have to do ends up being phone calls, which takes a lot of time from our staff, or in person, which also is exposing our staff. And yes.
Karen, so first of all, we are very much, many organizations in the same boat. I've received messages like this. We obviously won't have the time to unpack it all. So Jamal, if you could post that doodle now. So what's going to be in the chat now, as well as I'll send an email this evening with just quick notes and including this poll, is an hour in the next 2 weeks for organizations to come together and talk through some of these challenges. I'll share a few things just because I've seen also some of the budgets as we've applied or received funding, such as, some things to consider, Karen. Obviously, there's a risk of in-person, and Alexander and I have talked about this a lot about Alexander had a very strong and well-written email about the power of in-person as the best mechanism to help somebody reach the right decision to get vaccinated. In short, we know we're almost out of time. Thank you for teeing this up. Thank you for doing it over email too, as well. But if people could please fill out a time, we will regroup to talk at this more in length. There are a couple of organizations I'm going to reach out to specifically because you're a major focus of Centro del Pueblo is the indigenous population, correct? So we'll get some more of the indigenous organizations, East Bay Sanctuary, Cielo, as well as to join. Alexander, I'm hoping somebody from Kiwa can join because I know you've talked a lot about in-person and everyone's welcome for that conversation. So please fill out the doodle when you're free, share ideas that work. One last one, I'll just chime in. Anytime we've posted on our social, even just about this coalition, we get dirt. And I tried myself because I personally was just kind of interested in engaging in debate with some of the anti-vax community. That was a mistake. So we'll debate whether it's best to debate or just remove that comment. So please fill out that doodle. Thank you again for what everyone is doing here. And thank you, Karen, for teeing it up. And if you have the chance, give yourself some space and grace. I know a lot of the emails, especially Chancey and Benita's, were quite charged about charging into the new year, but we have a longer road ahead. I know I'm beginning to feel my limits of exhaustion this week playing nurse myself. So trying to remind myself equally as you guys. But we're here for each other. And Karen, thank you for sharing that because we've heard it all. And thank you for all the hearts. I'm going to share mine as well. Posey, we can stop the recording. I'm happy to stay on for just a few more minutes. Peppa seems to be entertaining the sick one.